Let us start with a prayer. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Mudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Dear students and friends, we are to focus on the topic that is rationale for Oriental / Indic research methodology in this first lecture. Now, suffice to say that you have opted for this course, which will expose you to a method of doing research. But there is a qualifying compound, that is, you are not only supposed to do how to conduct your research, but you have to use the Oriental / Indic perspectives. Now, this is a new beginning in the field of research methodology. Your first question should be, why and how should we use Indic perspectives or Oriental perspectives on research methodology or on critical inquiry? That is the first thing. So, in this lecture, our primary focus would be on the rationale, that is the raison d'etre of an Indic or Oriental framework of conducting research or research methodology, and why should this method of doing research using critical logic, rational analysis, tarka, vāda, pramāṇa, that is the means of right knowledge, prameya, the objects of right knowledge, has been neglected in our own education systems throughout the so-called Orient. So, that is another thing that we will discuss. Third is, the topic itself presupposes a kind of dichotomization or a kind of binarization of this world in East and West categorization. That is, the categorization of this world or the knowledge of the world into two mutually either oppositional or hostile categories, that is the East and the West, that is the Occident, that is the West, and the Orient, that is the East, created certain kinds of implications for disseminating and producing knowledge in the world. Knowledge is to be produced and disseminated, and then again reconstructed, recontextualized. But knowledge which has got to be disseminated, if it is disseminated only through the dominant perspective, that is the Western perspective, then the question arises, what about the other non-Western knowledge traditions, well-established knowledge traditions, where reason, logic, rational analysis held a very prominent place in the methods of critical examination. Now, I just want to come back to it again, that the Orient was constructed by a dominant Occident, a dominant West, as Edward Said proved it in 1978 book, Orientalism, without which the dominance and that overwhelming power, of the West could not be established. So this was a very self-conscious efforts, through a series of self-conscious efforts displayed in the mapping of this world cartographically, academically, controlling and regulating the non-Western world politically, economically, culturally, through all possible means where the agency and potency of the non-Western knowledge systems could be very meaningfully, very cleverly, strategically, be contained. And once the potency of the other knowledge systems, that is the non-Western knowledge systems, is neutralized, normalized, then even the colonized non-Western people could hardly understand that they are actually recycling, disseminating, internalizing a self-hating knowledge system imposed on them by the politically, militarily, economically more powerful Western world. History attests to it. There is no scope for any kind of individual opinion. Yes, even while the invaders and the colonizers, subjugated the non-Western societies and cultures, there was a kind of exchange of ideas, no doubt. It always happens, and it did happen. But that exchange of ideas was only for the benefit and justification of that Western control over the non-Western world. So therefore, look at the trajectory of that exchange, where the non-Western world became the raw material, as Professor Kapil Kapoor and Rajiv Malhotra ji in their writings, they keep on reminding us of how the non-Western world, including the education system of India, conceded to being a slave or a kind of secondary position, holding a secondary position, a subject position. So there is no samvad or dialogue between the so-called Occident and the so-called Orient, because these are two constructions, are the imaginary constructions. In fact, the world is world as it is. It is neither Occident nor Orient. It's merely a historical accident that the Occident had to invent an Orient to justify its a special kind of rule, a special kind of control over the rest of the world. So this relationship between Oriental and Occidental, the East and the West, has got to be understood. And if you read our own thinkers, particularly those thinkers, modern thinkers, for example, Bankim Chand Chattopadhyay, Sri Aurobindo, Swami Vivekananda, Rabindranath Tagore or Thakur, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and even Ananda Kumara Swami. They all affirm, while being well versed in the epistemology of the West, that should not be forgotten. They did not ignore the knowledge traditions of the West. So they internalized the knowledge traditions of the West, and then they pointed out that if the present day India, that is the emerging India, the 19th century onwards, there was a kind of India which was emerging, continues to imitate or mimic the knowledge systems fashioned out in the dominant West, India would be reduced to the position of a qualified slave. So, like the Prospero-Caliban relationship, Shakespeare, Tempest. So, Prospero gives Caliban the language, but that language is the connect between Prospero and Caliban, so that Prospero's orders would be carried out meaningfully in order to strengthen that colonial empire, remember. So, it is in this context that you see that the Oriental systems of knowledge, for that matter, even Japanese, Chinese, Sri Lankan, even this Middle East, that is kind of what you call Islamic Arabic tradition, and the Indic tradition. Now, the contribution of these traditions to the making of knowledge, jnana nirmana, and jnana prasara, that is the dissemination of knowledge, was not given any kind of proper position of equal significance. That is, it was relegated to the margins of area studies in the modern West, like most of the metropolitan universities in United States of America and Europe. They did study our own knowledge systems, but as exotic or mesomized, fossilized, atavistic kinds of knowledge systems that have already outlived their utility, because they came from a non-logical, mind you, a non-logical and irrational framework of knowledge, which was heavily grounded in its own mysticism, or you can say theological and religious dogmatism, and it was devoid of that scientific rigor and parameters of critical inquiry. Therefore, in order to make the observer or the reader internalize that the goal and the primary purpose of education is to receive education through a scientifically rigorous and critically well examined system of analysis, system of knowing, and that is the Western approach to knowledge. That is your research methodology at present. And that in one sense sums up as to why, now you see the second slide, as to why you should be aware of the Indic or the Oriental perspectives on research methodology, because if you are well versed, or if you try to understand actually how sound, how cogent were these knowledge systems, then you would try to translate them into the research methods. Because what are research methods? What is research methodology if it's not a systematized method of knowing rationally, knowing critically? So all all forms of research methodology, presuppose a kind of critical examination, a kind of logical questioning, and then making right conclusions, making right inferences. Lo and behold, now this whole worldview that the Orient offered to the world was stereotyped, as it is, as I said, non-logical, that is, it is illogical and superstitious and steeped in a esoteric metaphysics or epistemology, which is bereft of a kind of cool reasoning, cool logic. Therefore, this is not to be considered as a verifiable or legitimate method of conducting research objectively. So, that was the point that they made. So, this division of the artificial constructs called the Orient and the Occident only validates as to how we should now re-examine what is there in the Orient or in the Indic systems of critical inquiry, critical examination, that we can profitably use for the production and dissemination of knowledge. So first thing that I want to make clear, that we have clubbed Oriental and Indic, like putting an oblique or within the brackets. Now, this has been done with a purpose, and there is a distinction between the so-called Oriental and the Indic traditions. Mind you that the Indic tradition of knowledge, when I say this is the Indic framework of critical examination, critical thinking, critical analysis, then we come across a very highly sophisticated, logically articulated, methodical system of research, which is not anchored in either a theological dogmatism or an ideological dogmatism or political idealism, dogmatism, or religious orthodoxy or dogmatism. In sum, you would see that the Indian methods of or Indic methods of critical inquiry do not presuppose your being a kind of blind follower, a non-critical follower, of those political ideologies, cultural ideologies, religious or theological ideologies, which characterize the Western systems of critical inquiry, because the Western systems of critical inquiry, are marked by ideologies that is mutually incompatible, mutually hostile, conflict-ridden, template of arranging the systems of critical inquiry, where one system is locked into a fierce battle or combat with another system, and therefore out of that conflict emerges a third system, that is the favorite analogy, that thesis, antithesis and synthesis, and then again thesis and so this is the conflicting mode of knowledge, and the analysis of knowledge also, which characterizes the Western modes of knowledge and the perception of knowledge. When we use the Indic methods of critical examination of any text, any incident, any issue, any incident, they are holistic, integrative, and they are free from those restrictions, which limit the trajectory of thought in the Western tradition. That a person using, for example, a Marxist model or a Marxist research methodology, which is the most important research methodology, now will have to adopt only that prism of Marxist epistemology to understand any phenomenon and to critically examine that phenomenon precisely from the Marxist ideological point of view, and thereby he would never ever consider the other points of view which are also available to a researcher or a scholar, because that sort of argumentation presupposes a very linear sort of argumentation where only one system of thought is considered to be whole. It does not believe in Purnam Madaha, Purnam Midam, Purnat, Purnamudachyate. This is whole, but that is also whole. So, look at the system that you have devised, but look at the systems that others have devised also. There may be whole in all the systems of thought. So, that leaves no space for a kind of constructive dialogue, creative dialogue, an equal dialogue marked by equality between the two or the many engaged in a conversation or in a kind of academic exchange of ideas. So, that way Indic systems of research or critical analysis are open-ended, as Rajiv Malhotraji in his famous book Being Different, as Sri Aurobindo in his famous book The Foundations of Indian Culture. When the book was written in response to a very famous Orientalist's construction of India as a veritable hellhole, it's full of all kinds of uncivilized people, devoid of knowledge. And when that book came out, then Sri Aurobindo in 1917 and 18 published The Foundations of Indian Culture, and he held that the West and its knowledge systems, they have a trajectory to seek power through knowledge. Therefore, knowledge to them is merely a means to control the world, to enhance their material or economic status, to enhance their control over the rest of the world. Therefore, this equation between knowledge and power marks most of the knowledge systems of the West, whereas the Indian knowledge system, all kinds of Indian systems, thought systems are based on knowledge, humility and renunciation, that is detachment. It is called Shakti. Knowledge gives you Shakti, but Shakti can't be translated as worldly power. Shakti cannot be translated as colonial power. Shakti cannot be translated as the most dangerous, most feared political or military or economic power of the world. That is the problem with India's knowledge systems. Why India, in order to spread and disseminate its knowledge system, did not colonize the other countries? India did not do it. So, since India did not do it, and the spread of Indian knowledge and its thought systems all over the world, was only possible through the exchange of ideas, which necessitated a dialogue between the two equals, because the Indians did not control the minds of the Westerners who came here. Nalanda is the site where, the seekers of knowledge from different countries of the world came, starting from, say, 6th century CE onwards, Huensang, Ishing, and then, of course, people from Japan, from Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Korea, China, they all traveled to this very seat of knowledge, Nalanda. Nalanda becomes the epitome of Indian knowledge system, Indic knowledge system, because it was a seat of philosophical discourse, the discourse of research methodology. Remember, Nyaya, Vaisheshika. So it was also the seat of research methodology, systems of thought pertaining to Buddhism, Jainism, and what you call the Hindu thought or the Sanatan thought system, that is Yoga, Sankhya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, then what you call the secular knowledges, that is medical science, astrology, phonetics, then you have, metallurgy, arts, literature. So you see that Nalanda offered its students who came from different parts of the world, a kind of platform which was not based on the colonizer-colonized binary. Nalanda did not convert the people or convert its students to a particular mode of religion, okay? And that, in that sense, Nalanda stands for the Indic knowledge system, which is integral and inclusive and rigorously argumentative. Rigorously. It doesn't accept anything at the surface level. So any perception of reality, will have to undergo a severely critical method of testing and retesting based on logic, not based on your belief in any religious ideology or religious doctrine or a political doctrine or an economic doctrine, which are ultimately grounded in the power structures. The dominant paradigm in the Western tradition is that whatever knowledge you have to produce or receive will be negotiated through the grids of knowledge, which will be controlled by the power structures. So there is no escape from the dominant power structures that are responsible for the inculcation or indoctrination, of young minds with those, you can call them prejudiced, biased forms of knowledge, But on the other hand, so India offers to the world a highly systematic course of logical interrogation, logical examination, critical examination, and without which no research is possible. again the point has got to be noticed that Indic systems of knowledge are not God-centric, are not centered in the, you can say, in the liminal field, of a particular book or a particular prophet. Prophet means the greatest scholar who is said to be the only authority in that particular field of knowledge. So again, this becomes a fairly open and transparent, field of knowledge, pursuit of knowledge, where the very relationship between the reality and the perception of reality is analyzed through the prism of critical reasoning. So it is this critical reasoning which is either known as either nyaya, that is logic, critical inquiry, critical examination, or sankhya, that is the discourse of the particular, that is the particularity as well as the, what I say, the singularity. That is, sankhya presupposes in what ways the whole phenomena, appears to us as real because it is real, but how you perceive that reality, through a method of reasoning which is not based on your devotion, your commitment to a specific God. Remember, Sankhya, that's why the English equivalent of Sankhya is number or list. This is surprising to notice that through Indic wisdom, you converted those numbers into a system of critical thinking. That is, Sankhya is numbers. Then Vaisheshika. Again, these are the modes of critical inquiry. Whether you employ Nyaya system, that is Maharishi Gautam, 6th century BC, remember, or Sankhya even older than Nyaya, because Sankhya has been referred to in the Mahabharata. And all these terms which occur either in Nyaya or Sankhya or Vaisheshika or Mimamsa or Vedanta, or even Kashmir Shaivism, they all occur in the Vedic Vangmaya. That is very important to know. That the terminology of Indian knowledge systems, most of it comes from the Vedas. And then the Shastras were written. And on those Shastras, that is on those texts, expository texts on logic, on critical reasoning, there were several commentaries. Then there were commentaries on commentaries, Bhashya, Tika, Karikas were written. Why were so many Bhashyas were written on Buddhist philosophy, Jaina philosophy, Nyaya Darshana, Sankhya Darshana, Vaisheshika Darshana? Because there was again a kind of dialogue, a kind of samvada, which went on and on. And the scholars engaged themselves with either validating or revising and re-expanding their own tradition of thought, their own sampradaya, so that you have the first phase of Buddhism and then the division of Buddhism into 3 major branches, remember? And ultimately, the Buddhist and the what you call the Hindu thought or the Sanatan thought, okay, like Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Uttar Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa, and Kashmir Shaivism, and the schools of literary theory, that is Rasa, Dhvani, Vakrokti, Alankara, Riti, Auchitya, Chamatkara, they all coalesce and converge into the point of oneness, that is oneness of all. That is ultimately it is the real. Ultimately it is that truth, the manifestation of which in multifarious forms has got to be critically analyzed. So look at this, the apparent differences, even in the paths of methods of critical inquiry or critical analysis, which are there in different schools of Indian thought, do not presuppose a kind of hostile relationship. Not hostile relationship, because the debate between the vāda, the tarka between Adi Shankaracharya and Mandana Mishra does not presuppose the disappearance of dualism. That Mandana Mishra, accepts Adi Shankaracharya's worldview does not mean that there is only non-dualism of the Shankar's kind. No, there are so many other schools of non-dualism where Shankar's Advaita is one perspective of that non-dualism. This is not possible in those Abrahamic Semitic systems of thought, where you cannot take liberties with doctrine itself. The central doctrine cannot and should not be questioned. That is the problem with the... Now, could you get my point? That what is so special that we don't convert others to our opinion? It's an, as Professor Kapil Kapoor says, it's a cafeteria approach. Take it or leave it. The consequences are there even when you accept Indian critical methods, and there are consequences for you and for the world if you or the world does not follow the critical methods evolved in India. It doesn't force you, compel the seeker either to get converted to the Indian mode of thinking. That is remarkable in terms of allowing freedom for the subject, of the subject, to the subject. This kind of freedom was never questioned on the part of... Yes, every student, every seeker of knowledge was required to exercise a degree of discipline. That is the four connections. Anubandha, Chatushtaya. Only then you can have that adhikara. You have that, cultivate that aptitude to come into, to enter a particular kind of field of knowledge. Suppose you are a student of law, that is legal studies. Then you have to have that aptitude for legal studies. You have to study the primary sources, primary texts very carefully, so that there will be a preliminary test which is held to check your aptitude for legal studies. If you are a student of medical sciences or physical sciences, again your adhikara, that you have that aptitude, is got to be tested. Nalanda, through its Dwarapala, only 2 out of 10 or even 1 out of 10 could succeed. Hwensang says it. Otherwise, all were turned away by the Dwarapala, who were the great scholars themselves. Look at those, the aptitude. You have that adhikara, and in order to create that competence and aptitude, you have to undergo a discipline, ekagrata. A kind of ekagrata, a kind of shuchita, that is purification of mind, body and spirit. If you do not follow it, of course, you can have then not this kind of jnana, but rajasic and tamasic jnana. You can tamasic means a kind of knowledge which is not pursued through the proper discipline, but is acquired for the domination, for violence, for subjugation, for doing evil or for doing ill to others. You can have a tamasic jnana, and you can also have a rajasic jnana where you have your sattva is there, where your goodness is intact, but your goodness is overpowered by your self-interest. So look at this. Your human mind and human character, human consciousness cannot be controlled and regulated in a single stream, so that you are tailoring, doctoring the mind or consciousness of the seeker. No, it depends on the seeker herself or himself to prepare herself or himself for the knowledge. Mind you, this fierce interrogation and question and answer, which is the hallmark of Bharatiya or Indic tradition, like Krishna and Arjuna. Entire Mahabharata is where the two or the many are always interlocked in question answer, and even the supposed divine forms, or divine beings are subjected to rigorous critical interrogation, mind you. And whenever and wherever the human beings abandon this critical reasoning coupled with nurturance of proper discipline, there are consequences for them. Nothing is prescriptive in Indian tradition, whereas in the West, things are prescriptive. So, any deviation from those prescriptions in our tradition, there are suggestions, there are suggestions, there are instructions that in order to follow this path, you have to undertake this kind of yama and niyama, yama and niyama, that you have to have certain restrictions and you have to observe a certain moral codes, so that your buddhi, your mind, intelligence, becomes focused, ekagra. So that is not supposed to be a kind of, as you can say, a kind of very idealistic and impractical demand on the part of the systems of knowledge. No, it was on the other hand very practical, you can say, demand, or very practical mode of observing the necessary discipline for the creation and comprehension of knowledge. How can you be enrolled in the defense system without having a proper psychologically strong mind, then a highly alert and highly strong body, and then again having a body response to the outside stimuli of a very of a very sensitive nature. You have to cultivate that form of discipline, subject your mind, body, and your thinking to a rigorous discipline. Only then you can be enlisted in the defense system. If you are an artist, then again there is a kind of discipline. So in Indian knowledge system, this is not the predominance of a particular deity or a particular god, as they say, or a particular political doctrine in the form of ideology that cannot be questioned and that has to be followed in all forms, in which they come to us, to produce knowledge and to be a seeker. So this is again, what are the words used by Krishna in order to explain the position of criticality or critical reasoning? Look, pariprashnena sevaya, O Arjun, tat vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnananah tattva darshana. Arjun, you want to pursue knowledge? Remember, knowledge is not possible without pariprashnena. You have to cultivate the spirit, that quality, that faculty of critical questioning, critical inquiry. Pariprashnena, and then sevaya. Then you have to be in service of your acharya. That is, you have to cultivate that relationship with your acharya, with your teacher. So, there should be a rigorous questioning between the two. So, there should be a critical debate between the two, but there should be the spirit of service. Service unto the teacher, service unto society, service unto world. Pariprashnena sevayaha. Only then the person who knows reality would and could impart knowledge to you. So that is one thing. Second, I myself am a form of debate. Look at this. That if you want to understand the truth, then truth cannot be known without critical examination. And that's why the shloka is Sarganam adi antacha madhyam chaiv aham arjuna adhyatma vidya vidyanam vāda pravadatam aham. Vāda pravadatam aham. In all kinds of debates, in all kinds of constructive dialogues and critical engagements, I am the logical conclusion. I am the critical inference. I am the critical perception. I am the critical discussion. Vāda. Look at this. Don't trust me that I am your God. Trust me because I want you to cultivate the spirit of relentless questioning, because without relentless questioning and critical reasoning, you cannot reach or arrive at the truth. And if you want to know me, then I am that truth. I am that truth. Whether you believe in me or you believe that I am your God, no, not required at all. What is required, expected of you as a seeker? So that is important. Another important thing is, having said that India offers those 6 systems of Indian philosophy or Indian worldview. Apart from this, there is Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Shaktism, Kashmir Shaivism, and then you have the whole world of literary theories. Now, the important thing is that it is this Indic worldview which expresses itself either in its 6 systems of philosophy, or Jainism, or Buddhism, or Sikhism, or even in its literary theories. It is this predominance of a dharma-centric vision. Whether you follow any sampradaya of jnana, of any thought system in India, All thought systems presuppose not your firm belief in God, or remind you, they all presuppose your firm belief in dharma, that is righteousness, that is essence, that is goodness, that is good conduct, that is your duty, that is rights, that is your character, that is nyaya, justice. Now look at this emphasis on knowledge, the purpose of which is to understand and practice. Understand and then practice dharma, not adharma. That's why in the Shikshavalli of Taittiriya Upanishad, Satyam vad dharmam char. Understand, these two form a pair. It's an eternal pair. No truth, whether you arrive at truth through critical reasoning, maybe, but Hitler adopted a kind of critical reasoning to establish that the Aryan race was the best race, and the name of Hitler's party was Nationalist Socialist. Socialist. So you see, all those ideologues and politicians who understood a particular worldview which was grounded in violence, in subjugation, and in a kind of ideological orthodoxy like Marxism. So you have the followers of Marx who were also the leaders. What they did to the world, whether it's Soviet Russia, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, the Cultural Revolution, Pol Pot, if you put them together, how many millions of people were massacred? Only because they did not give that freedom to the human beings to critically examine the validity of those ideological systems which were imposed on the people. So again, that is a question which is open to all. What kind of communism is this if the execution of my communism results into a Tiananmen Square? What kind of peace I hold for the world if I follow a system of thought which is theological and which results into the mindless slaughter of the innocent people? Because that is also a kind of knowledge. That is also a kind of knowledge. You can't question it, because that knowledge also comes from a source. But if the followers, like the followers of logic in India, are given this freedom, question yourself first, question those who impart knowledge to you afterwards, check out whatever you are learning, through sanshaya, doubt. Doubt is a category, third important category. So doubt the producers of knowledge, and doubt also the receivers of knowledge, and doubt also the kind of pedagogy that you are accepting as the normative pedagogy. So my point is, it's open-ended, sanshaya. And once you eliminate your doubts through critical reasoning, then you are coming to the right path. Therefore, doubts lie at the center of Indian critical reasoning. Second, not only the right knowledge, but also false knowledge has been analyzed. That you, in place of or instead of right knowledge, you may be given the false knowledge, that is false knowledge. Now that false knowledge will also use that form of critical reasoning which will be faulty, defective logic. It's an open-ended thing. You cannot use sanshaya, doubt, and you cannot use the category of a false knowledge, while you are using a particular either Marxist form of argumentation. You just can't do it. Because it's a dominant ideology which refuses, which does not admit of that internal examination, critical examination of the ideology itself. So India developed this, and then from India, remember, this kind of structured critical reasoning, traveled to China, Japan, and other countries of Asia, which used those insights, critical insights, in the form of either Confucianism or Taoism or Zen, or even the Hinayan or Mahayana or Vajrayana forms of Buddhism, Now, they used those insights which primarily came from India, and those critical insights produced their own worldviews. The difference between the Indian thought systems, which can be used for critical examination, and why not the Chinese and Japanese thought systems can be used as research methodology, remember, is precisely this, that India is the only country in Asia that has 6 systems of research methodology, of critical reasoning. It does not have 6 critical insights for research methodology. So if you are using Zen, then Zen is not research methodology. Zen gives you a particular insight or a few insights. If you are using Confucianism, if you are using Bushido or Shinto from Japan, you can use Shinto or Bushido insights, proto-Shinto insights into a world of, which should have respect for nature, respect for the other, respect for society, respect for family. These are the insights which are there in Confucianism or proto-Shinto worldviews. But they are not the modes of doing research. So you don't have those 16 elements or topics of critical inquiry as you have in Nyaya. You do not have in Sankhya the Padartha or the elements. You do not have those kinds of 9 primary categories as you have in Vaisheshika. You do not have those kinds of rigorously argued categories in other thought systems, because they come up with certain insights which can be used for the benefit of the students and for the benefit of the seekers of knowledge, for their own enlightenment. So this is the major difference, Why only when I say Oriental research methodology, now Oriental research methodology by and large is Indic research methodology, because India is the country that has the benefit, or it is the prime example of having produced those multiple modes and nodes of critical inquiry which are still relevant in the contemporary context. So therefore, the marginalization of this logical discourse of critical inquiry in the post-colonial India, in the post-independence era in India, is shocking indeed. So that gives us all the more reason to investigate as to why and how this kind of system of critical inquiry was not applied and was not implemented in the structures of higher education or school education in India. So remember, if you read K.C. Bhattacharya's 1928 essay, Swaraj in Ideas, and in which K.C. Bhattacharya tells us that it is not that we should not have a dialogue with the Western traditions of thought. We should have, as a living civilization. India ano bhadra kartavo yanto vishyatah. Let noble thoughts come to us from all sides. But that doesn't mean that you are parasitically dependent for your thinking, for your critical examination on the other systems of thought, forgetting and becoming oblivious, amnesiac to your own knowledge systems, which are equally rigorous, which are equally analytical. So, K.C. Bhattacharya says that India may achieve independence, but it has got to be seen whether that independence is the independence of thought or not. That was K.C. Bhattacharya. And then Rabindranath Tagore, in the center of Indian culture. That's a famous address, famous essay, his address, which was later on converted into an essay. He thought that I have full hope that Indian students who are having bright minds will produce knowledge. But I have a fear that the production of knowledge by the Indian students, notwithstanding, they might end up as the rag pickers of the dustbin of European knowledge. Mind you. That notwithstanding the academic excellence of the Indian students, the bright minds, because they have been inflicted with a kind of education system which is primarily Western, that has stunted their maulik or their original thought process. So they are only thinking not as Indians but as the translated Europeans. Look at the final result of Macaulay's Minutes. Macaulay's Minutes. That I want Indians, because the empire can't be run without these Indians, educated Indians. But these educated Indians should be the translated Indians. That was, I think, very realistic on the part of Macaulay. We should never curse Macaulay for envisioning a translated India, because it is we ourselves who allowed ourselves to be translated into the Macaulayan vision of India. So that is again the issue. Therefore, Ananda Kumaraswamy, Rabindranath Tagore, or even Gandhi, they understood everything that was positive in the West, in terms of its rationality, in terms of its progress, in terms of its action-oriented, course of progress, where action is considered to be supreme. Okay, so they said that these are the very positive qualities. It's emphasis on honesty, but they rejected that if you adopt that model of production of research for the sake of acquiring power and becoming an imitated copy of the West, then you are going to be destroyed. India, because of its civilizational heritage, and because, as I said, that you have to be, your all knowledge systems are grounded in dharma, and having a simultaneous trajectory which is suggested by purushartha, that is dharma, artha, kama and moksha. So your worldly progress presupposes possession of wealth, acquisition of wealth, that is artha, and then kama, desire, including your sexual desire. That's not a taboo. Artha and kama, they are the most important coordinates of human action. And then they are flanked by, on the one hand, dharma. They should be driven by dharma. They should be grounded in dharma, because if they are grounded in dharma, they will end up giving freedom, true freedom to all. That is the position of moksha. That is true liberation. It involves social liberation, social freedom, cultural freedom, economic freedom, political freedom, and even freedom at the spiritual level. Now, it was a very practical schema that lies at the core of Indian thought systems. And then, in higher education, this kind of colonized pedagogical, you can say, system, or colonized pedagogical modules, and their continuance even to this day, is now being questioned by the sincere students as well as the academics. They say that India, now the fifth most powerful economy in the world, and perhaps the second most populous country in the world, should not live out its existence as an appendage to the developed West. That, mind you, when they say that we are not an appendage or a mimic to the powerful West, they means that since our civilizational goals are different, we have to understand this difference, which is the civilizational difference. We do not want to have a civilizational clash with those who are now powerful. We don't believe in the clash between civilizations. But if other civilizations think that since India does not offer any resistance, then India will continue to be in a state of perpetual servility and subjugation. So if we do not clash with others, then we should resist being subjugated to a particular, colonized or colonial discourse, which does not allow the freedom of critical thinking. And the modes and methods of critical thinking are particularly and peculiarly Indic. So, in that sense, this new awakening in contemporary India, and needless to say, you cannot discount the role of great Indian minds and thinkers, starting from, say, Bankim Chandra and Sri Aurobindo and Rabindranath Tagore, and then you have Ananda Kumara Swami, and then Rabindranath Tagore and Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, then Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and all these great minds, they said that something is wrong with Indian education system, and something is really wrong in having a course of research methodology that is totally devoid of all those methods of critical investigation which were devised in India so methodically, at a time when there was no such kind of critical system of investigation in the West. Tell me, the rise of the strategies of critical analysis called Tantra Yuktis. We had a session on Tantra Yuktis, that is the strategies of critical examination, either 32 or 36. Charaka Samhita. Charaka is said to have happened either in 8th century BC or 4th century AD or 4th century CE. We do not know. Sushruta, 4th century CE. Kautilya, 4th century BCE. Look, and all those strategies of reading are also mentioned in the Vedic Vangmaya also. And mind you, the strategies of critical reading, that is Tantra Yukti, on the one hand, there were Tantra Yuktis, and on the other, we evolved Mimamsa, epistemology, Nyaya, that is logic, Vaisheshika, that is that kind of discourse of the particular and the general, which is a scientific discourse for analyzing that material reality, Vaisheshik. So look at those, what I am trying to say, that this entire field, this geographical field called India, was also a field of unified knowledge, a kind of integral knowledge, where if you want to date it from 6th century BC to the present day, you have an unbroken tradition of sustained critical examination. Now, Tantra Yuktis were first mentioned in the book of medical science, that is Charaka Samhita, then Sushruta Samhita, then Ashtanga Hridaya. They are all the textbooks of, medical science. Why? Why Kautilya mentions those strategies of reading? Kautilya says that if you want to understand how political economy works, how can you do good as a ruler to your own state, to your own people, you should cultivate your knowledge of anvikshiki, logic. Anvikshiki, logic. Varta, that is your whole knowledge of political economy. Varta, economy, agriculture, trade, Varta. And Trai, that is your own Veda, your own texts, not holy texts, mind you, not sacred texts. Shabda pramāṇa, texts which are so composed that they can give you great insights on most of the aspects of life. So that is Veda itself means knowledge. Veda itself means knowledge. So that is again something where the experiential and the intuitive, they both constitute the two aspects of the same contemplative critical mind. Mind which is contemplative as well as critical. But this contemplative critical mind is precisely experiential and then intuitive. That is to say, pratyaksha is the pramāṇa. So your pramāṇa, which is pratyaksha, only then you come to the inference or anumana. We said that no, India is overburdened with a kind of mysticism, a kind of transcendentalism. So India does not have any sort of logical pramāṇa or logical proof. India is the first civilization that demands logical proof, either through direct perception. How can you say India is unscientific, non-scientific, when India's category of reasoning first demands that direct proof of your direct perception. And even if you have that direct perception, then it talks about the inferential perception. So suppose Sushant ji is not here, the dean is not here, but we can use inferential perception that your dean was here a few moments ago. Inferential perception. Then you have Shabda Pramāṇa, your verbal testimony of those realized great scholars who produced knowledge for the good of others, mind you. Who were those reliable persons? You have Shabda Pramāṇa. You have those Pramāṇa also that go by analogies, Udaharana, Upanaya, Upamana. So look at the scientificity of those, as I said, those stages of critical examination which come from the Vedic tradition. When I say Vedic tradition, kindly take it for knowledge tradition. Vedic tradition does not mean that you shut your eyes on whatever you are being instructed. Remember, there is an Upanishad by the name of Prashnopanishad. There is an Upanishad by the name of Kathopanishad. There is an Upanishad by the name of Vredaranyaka Upanishad. Tell me which Upanishad and which text of Indian knowledge tradition is not without critical or is without critical reasoning. Which text is without critical reasoning? So, contrary to that research methodology which was imposed on us and practiced in our universities and colleges and institutions of higher knowledge production, we could not implement or prepare those modules of critical thinking whereby we could instruct our students in all disciplines, in all fields of knowledge, whether they are the normative sciences, microbiology, biotechnology, physics, chemistry, geography, psychology, political science, anthropology, or literary studies, fine arts, and all forms of sciences. That this is the methodology of knowing, and not only knowing, how do we know what we know? So, methodology not based on the production of knowledge, no, that is the mode of the West. A methodology which has been so rigorously, you can say, argued out or so rigorously, textualized that it really is about knowing what you know, thinking what you think. This is a taxonomy of critical thinking, that how your mind works when it is in contact with any aspect of reality, how it perceives that reality, but perception can be pseudo perception also. So, through Anumana Shastra, through Shabda Pramāṇa, by eliminating all the doubts, Shanshay, use your logic, your tarka, in order to produce or arrive at that truth that you are seeking. So this should have been the mode of research methodology, and of course, in the same course, our policy makers or our educationists could also include the Western research methodology also. That is, all your isms, historicism, new historicism, structuralism, post-structuralism, feminism, post-feminism, because that is the postal process. Humanism, post-humanism, truth, then post-truthism, everything depends on Yes, you can also expose the students to the Purva Paksha. There is no logic in India. Purnam Madaha, Purnam Midam. Know the Purva Paksha. Om Sangakshadvam, Samvadadvam, Samvo Mananse Janatam, Deva Bhage, Yatha Purve, Sanjanana Upasate. Let us study together, let us have a dialogue together, let us focus on things, on knowledge, together with concentration of minds. As our elders, as those who happened before us, they also contemplated the aspect of realities, in their own manner. So we have to understand those scholars, those great minds who also tried to understood that reality in their own manner. So again, that is important. We have not rejected or demolished the existing methods of thought. Rather, we have, in order to make the Purva Paksha, only then Paksha can be put forth. What is the Purva Paksha? What is the survey of available literature? In your research paper, you just refer to the survey of existing literature on a particular topic. So that survey of existing literature becomes your Purva Paksha. And then you say that my research project, differs from the available insights on a particular point, because I am using a different kind of perspectivization, on a different aspect of the same reality. A same reality may have a different aspect to it. Therefore, that is how it was envisioned in the Indian methods of critical inquiry, which have long been ignored in our own institutional framework. So that should not have happened. So somebody may also ask that what are the major features of this Indic research methodology? So contrary again to the popular perception that you have to be chanting Vedic verses, you have to be well versed with Sanskrit, so you have to be an acharya of Sanskrit, and you have to be a kind of overly and overtly a spiritual seeker or a half sannyasi, a person who is a renunciate can only be enrolled or enlisted as a research scholar. No one will be a research scholar in India if you explain, describe the characteristic features of an Indian student or Indian research scholar, making a case for her or his being a transcendentalist, a follower of a religious doctrine, a non-critical believer of a particular sacred book, a non-critical believer of a particular personality, a hero. Now, if you do all these things, then there is no case for any Indic research methodology, because perhaps the West has mastered this kind of research methodology in the name of reason. Mind you, the revolt against reason is the cause for postmodernism, new historicism, post-feminism, environmentalism, post-humanism, and post-truth also. They will continue to create these mutually hostile, grids of knowledge, in the name of constantly updating themselves. Are you getting my point? Because they don't know how to have an integral and inclusive worldview or thought system which contains in itself, which has an internally evolved critical system, which not only critiques the external worldview or external perception of the world, but also the internal perception of the world. That is, the world as we know it from within, and the world as we know it from without. So we don't have to be, you can say, anti-tradition, because tradition is not the word used in India. Tradition is used in the Western discourses opposed to the modern, So this is again a binary, that if you use tradition, then you are anti-modern, and if you use the modern framework of critical investigation, then you are anti-tradition, Therefore, this revolt against that Western reasoning, is not possible here, because if you say that there is no God, they say, then of course you come unto us and we will understand you better and let us learn about truth. Set aside this entity called God. You say no, everything is untruth. There is nothing truth. That you are all the more welcome, because this world is abhasa, this is adhyasa, this appears to be maya, but this is also a very valid power that creates all forms of perception. So you are welcome. If you say that, look, there is perception, there is reality, and there is also non-reality, then you say, please come and have a dialogue with us, because we know that there is something called Vishishtadvaita, that there is non-duality, there is one, but there may be two, there may be three. So look at this kind of, as I said, the integral. It is called spiritual, but spiritual cannot be equated with adhyatma. Mind you, look at the meaning of adhyatma. Adhyatma does not negate the body, because it is atman, and atman includes your body also. Mind you, atman, you go to the Vaman Shivram Apte's dictionary or Monier Williams dictionary, that says atman is a loaded concept in Indian knowledge system. Atman means yourself, that is your bodily self also. Atman means your inner self also. Atman means your consciousness also. And Atman means that highest form of consciousness also. Atman. So Atman is an individual also. And Adhyatman, since Adhi, something that lies above and through that body, you reach that above, that level. So Adhyatma is not spiritual in the sense, in spiritual only the spirit counts, and spirit has many negative meanings also. I hope you are getting my point. How can it be Adhyatma? Because Adhyatma does not cancel the material, does not cancel, eliminate that adhara, that is body. So it is through that substratum called body that you arrive at a higher level of consciousness, where the dual is true at one stage, then the non-dual is true, then the qualified non-dual is true, then the pure non-dual is true. Look at that discourse of one, which produces 6 or 7, differential perceptions of the reality. And each school, has its own legitimacy, without necessarily cancelling out the other perception of reality. So Sankhya does not say that you should have a running war with Nyayikas and Vaisheshikas, they are one. So it doesn't say that those who are using yoga and Vedanta, they are outside the domain of knowledge. No, those who focus on yoga and Vedanta, they are also having a very important take or very important perception of reality. Because what is that total reality? No one knows. No one knows what that totality of truth or totality of reality is. And so again, in this sense, and this interconnectivity of what? Of logic, critical reasoning, philosophy, scientific inquiry, aesthetics, and the material knowledges you call secular knowledges. If you read even the books of mathematics, as India was also the land of mathematics, algebra, trigonometry, zero, calculus, algorithm, and even the numbers. India gave to the world in the domain of mathematics the most empirical of all sciences. And still we were labeled as the Oriental natives. These are the indigenous knowledge systems. Again, a very, very pejorative referent a pejorative concept. When your knowledge system, look at the signification of the term native in the Oxford English Dictionary. Like swadhinata and swatantrata, which is the phalam. Phalam means which is the result of jnana, can never be equated with freedom or independence. Freedom and independence, these are the two words and notions, that arise in the Western context, having very limited meanings, and some of them are disturbingly negative. Kindly check out the meanings of freedom and independence and liberty, all. But you equate them interchangeably without checking out, without having any doubt that your swatantrata is freedom, your swadhinata is independence. Please check out. That's why we say that if a researcher does not have doubts, then in Indic framework of research methodology, or logic, you are not qualified to be a proper student. What are your doubts? I should doubt. Why should I use the term freedom to say that I am swadhina, whereas swa in freedom and independence both? But we never ask it. We never ask for it. We never question it. We also do not question how culture is equated with Sanskriti. Sum plus kri, sum plus kri. Where is this sum in culture? Again, you go to the Oxford English Dictionary and its etymology. It's a mechanical, material process of preserving, nurturing anything, and that's all. But here, in Sanskriti, look at the Yajurveda. Sa Sanskriti Prathama Vishwavara. That is universal. Because there is some, and there is Kri. Kri is the constant activity, dynamicity, flow of energy. Kri dhatu is perhaps if there is one dhatu that has maximum meanings in Sanskrit, that is Kri. Without Kri, that's why Kriya. Kriya comes from Kri. Without Kriya, all your knowledge systems, all your actions, all your thoughts, you will become lifeless without Kri. What is that Kri? That is supposed to have that sum, that symphony, that harmony, that sum, that equipoise, which can be attained only when you have the sanskaras. That is the proper discipline. That is sanskaras, that constant refinement and improvement of your actions, thoughts and deeds. So, Sanskriti is altogether different from in Aitareya Brahmana. For the first time in Aitareya Brahmana, this term has been used, and in Aitareya Brahmana it says that it is Atma Parishkara. Sanskrit means Atma Parishkara. Only when you go on improving, refining yourself, only then your body will be reformed. And when your body and thoughts are reformed, then the individual is reformed, then family will be reformed, and then so what you again in the Western discourse say, there is a culture of an individual, culture of the family, culture of the nation, culture of the world, but you are superimposing on the concept of culture all these enabling meanings without having the etymology to support those meanings. That is the major difference. You are using only that pratyay called samkriti, Sanskriti. So you have a kriti, even literary text. You have the kriti, that is the whole world is a kriti. All your utterances are kriti. All your kriyas are kriti. So look at the scope of Sanskriti in terms of Sanskriti itself, and that we derive when we use logical, process of critical inquiry. That starts from what is the pramāṇa. I do not have the pratyaksha, I do not have the direct perception of culture because it's a value. Like aesthetic emotions. Aesthetic emotions are not concrete objects. How can you have that direct evidence for your karuna rasa, for emotion of pathos, aesthetic emotion of pathos, aesthetic emotion of comic humor, aesthetic emotion of heroism? They are the states of mind, sentiments. But then again they say that if those sentiments, if those aesthetic emotions, if they also undergo a process of emergence, when the actor or the viewer comes into contact with those representations of realities, then there is an aesthetic validation. There is not a kind of a pratyaksha pramāṇa, but there is an anumana, which is the aesthetic anumana. So that kavyanumana, that depends on the perception of the representation of reality. So again there is something which is common to Nyaya, Mimamsa and aesthetics. So what I am trying to say, that this kind of interconnectedness is also this interdisciplinary nature of critical thought. Then what is its applicability in modern research? What is its applicability? Applicability, one, and the most important is that our students, our research scholars will not be subjected to those non-critical forms of dogmatic ideologies of whatever kind, right, left or center. I don't want to be involved in these kinds of, but any student would be enabled not to be either colonized by those mutually hostile ideologies, which shut out the critical thinking on the part of the research scholar. So the research scholar need not be a Marxist research scholar or a feminist research scholar or an environmentalist or eco-critical research scholar. Are you getting my point? So that's important, that this kind of research methodology, if we use, it will primarily be based on language, analysis of language, because we perceive the world and we also use language to perceive the world. We cannot understand the world without perception, and perception needs verbalization. So perception and the verbalization of perception, that is the starting point of any kind of research methodology. And this perception of reality, remember, requires all those 16 categories, mind you, which are listed in Nyaya. If you go to the other extreme, you say, sir, there is something which is not present. They say that if something is anupalabdha, if something is apoh or abhava, something that is absent, even let us discuss it as an evidence. Look at a court case when the criminal says that I was not present at the scene of crime. He proves his or her anupalabdhi, his or her absence. Shalja, are you getting my point? That I will prove that I did not commit that, knowing full well myself that I committed that crime. I would say that I was not there, anupalabdhi, abhava. But there will be a defense, there will be a counsel on the side of the victim. Who would use logic better? That your nyaya, your logic will be a pseudo-logic, will be proved by a counselor, by an advocate, who demonstrates all those evidences, in a more logical manner before the magistrate, before the nyaya dhyaksha, before the dharmadhyaksha. Nyaya and dharma are also interchangeable concepts. Nyaya means dharma, and dharma also means nyaya. That's why a judicial magistrate is called nyayadhisha as well as dharmadhyaksha. So this is again an important thing, that we need that kind of relationship between the teacher and the taught. And this Guru Shishya Parampara is not, again you see, it is free from that indoctrination where the Guru or the teacher imposes her or his own worldview onto the mind of the disciple. No, the Guru only makes the Shishya, makes the disciple aware that jnana is inherently always available, always present in the mind or consciousness of the student. So there is a rigorous argumentation on any kind of perception. There is a samvada between the guru, the teacher, and the taught. And remember, the teacher learns as much from the student, as the student learns from the teacher. And the guru at times concedes that defeat. Look at that Kathopanishad. Look at that Yagyavalkya and Gargi Samvada. Yagyavalkya Maitreyi Samvada. Look at that Rishi Agastya and Lopamudra Samvada. Rigorous questioning of the legitimacy of your valid position, which is considered to be a given position. And that position, that what is truth? So what is truth? That my sacred book says that this is the truth. No, we won't accept that truth as the truth which is captured and held captive either in one God or in one sacred text. We would say we would investigate. And that is why this open kind of logical argumentation, it defines that Indians, that is the systems of education that Indians evolved, before they were subjected to a series of invasion, were remarkably open-ended and fairly democratic also. Fairly democratic. So the destruction of Nalanda was not such a great loss at all. Otherwise, knowledge should have vanished from Bharata. Destruction of Nalanda did not result into the destruction of knowledge, jnana, because knowledge was perceived and knowledge was preserved in the form of consciousness, in the form of memory, smriti, shruti, smriti. Shrotavyo, mantavyo, where is library? Do you need a library? Do you need this machinery? Shrotavyo, mantavyo, dhyatavyo. Where is that technology that you need? Yes, the invaders will keep on trying to destroy you from without, because you are a knowledge-based civilization. But the basis of your knowledge is not in the form of its preservation through material and mechanical means. Therefore, Nalanda of the mind survived, because the Nalanda of the mind is the eternal site of consciousness. So, Bharat or India, will continue to exude, continue to transmit those forms of knowledge, those forms of critical investigation and inquiry, that characterize its cultural heritage. So one Nalanda, one Vikramshila, one Odantapuri, one Takshila, one Mathura, all these Indian universities, including world's best university in Nalanda, they were subjected to pillage, destruction. But then The history is before you. Then you have the comparative perspectives, you know. That sounds to be a very formulaic approach to compare two knowledge systems, because two knowledge systems which are different from chalk from cheese should not be compared. Should not be compared. Like world literature can never be called Vishwa Sahitya. I told you once that their conception of world cannot be equated with the conception of Vishwa. And the concept of literature as derived in the West is so different from the concept of Kavya or Sahitya in India. So either you talk of world literature, then you study world literature as the category has evolved in the West. Or if you are an Indian or you belong to this Indian subcontinent, you know, then you should also study that we have the notion of Vishwa and the notion of Sahitya, which is dated thousands of years, you know, before the West could evolve its own notion of world as well as literature, because the notion of the world depends on that cartographic imagination of Europe, where it created a map of the world, where Europe was kept at the center in a disproportionate manner. Look at their conception of the world. 17th, 18th century, and this was again in the 18th century, then the discipline of world literature emerges. A kind of world literature which is already divided, a world which is divided into us and them, the colonizer and colonized. And that world creates its own canon of world literature, remember? And that's why the practitioners and the thinkers of world literature say that we should abandon the study of world literature as it exists now. It has to be decentered altogether, because it is NATO literature, Eurocentric literature, or Euro-Americocentric literature, and it comes to the different parts of world through the established metropolitan grids of academic production and control. They give you fellowships, they give you scholarships. So this whole discourse of comparative literature, world literature, as Gayatri Chakravarti spoke in her seminal book, Death of a Discipline. And again in that famous essay which was circulated to you, that David Damrosch and Gayatri Chakravarti spoke, says that this study of world literature will end up making our students culturally deracinated. Mark these warning signals. This study of world literature as it exists now will result into making our students culturally deracinated. Culturally deracinated. And then philologically bankrupt, because you won't know the difference between culture and Sanskriti, nation and Rashtra, Sahitya and literature. You will be philologically bankrupt, and thereby they will be complicit with the worst forms of global capitalism. I am not saying these words. And then 1997, the first dictionary of global culture was produced. First dictionary of global culture. Who was the editor? Henry Louis Gates Jr., that acclaimed professor. And then in the preface added to that global dictionary of global culture, it is said that since we have already triumphed the alternative notions of time and space, we don't have to prove that the only legitimate cognition of time and space is the Christian notion of time and place. Look at this. This is not my submission to you. This is how the worthy editors, the great scholars, who were situated in great universities in United States of America, they came out with this kind of with a statement, a declaration, that nothing else remains to be proven, because the coordinates of time and coordinates of place, Desha and Kala, all these two coordinates have already been conquered. So there is no other node of perception or node of the production of knowledge, because you will occupy only that time, that place which has already been constructed for you. So look at this kind of global culture. You say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means India embraces all this universe as a family. I think you are being simplistic. India qualifies this statement from Mahopanishad. It says, Ayam nijah paro veti ganana laguchet sam. This is the first condition. This is an example of hetva bhasa, fallacious reasoning, defective logic. This whole world cannot be a family, because what is the hetu? What is the reason? The reason and the condition was, Ayam nijah paro veti. This is mine, that is yours. This is how the ignorant people perceive the world and will continue to perceive the world. Only those who are noble hearted, only those who are having a noble character, jnana, udara charita nam tu, those who have knowledge but they are of noble character. You have a jnana but not nobility of character, your knowledge is dangerous. Udara charita nam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. Only for those who have acquired right knowledge and follow right conduct. Look at the Ashtanga Marga. Samyak jnana and samyak achara. So look at that, only for those, this world is one family. It should not be misconstrued with a kind of a universalism, which is a kind of simplicism, which again makes you critically blind to the fact that this world is full of people who continue to other others, who continue to hate others, continue to kill others, continue to colonize others. That is the right interpretation based on critical logic. So you can be your own enemy. Mind you, this is again a position which you can derive using Indian logic, You can be, since you belong to India, truth is not a copyright given to the Indians or the Indic systems of thought, mind you. Anyone who critically understands, critically investigates the method of perceiving the world, remember, and this method is proven true on all the stages of critical investigation, that we have evolved. Then irrespective of its location, whether it is European or Australian or Canadian or American, no, that method of critical investigation is valid. It is not that since you have evolved a critical method of investigation in India, therefore everything, every method, every knowledge system that you evolve in India is true or is grounded in dharma. Remember, this is also true, because you have so many textbooks on research methodology coming in India, like the Bloomsbury keywords. Bloomsbury, in 2 years ago, Bloomsbury, an international publishing house, and it engaged some prominent names as the editors of Peter D'Souza, Rukmini Bhaya Nair. They are the editors. And look at the preface. It says that we are giving you the keywords to conducting research on issues pertaining to India, but every care has been taken to divest the keywords from the knowledges produced in Indian languages, including Sanskrit. That is, the keywords which are the key concepts produced by the Indian collaborators, edited by the two Indians, published by an international publishing house, Bloomsbury, Keywords for the Study of India. Peter is. It declares that we, in the explanation of these terms, in the logical, critical examination of these terms, every possible effort has been made on the parts of the contributors to divest these terms of their location in Indian knowledge systems in all its languages, more so in Sanskrit. Now, is it not intellectual despotism? But who questions that? So, my point is, this kind of Western methodology, which presupposes an empirical, analytical point of view, whereas India points to an experiential and intuitive, which is also based on rigorous argumentation. Remember, when I say intuitive, you can say, sir, intuitive cannot be logical. No, intuitive, anumana is intuitive. You have to intuit. So, then objectivity. Now, objectivity and that kind of empiricity, they are supposed to be the Western, the hallmarks of Western methods of research. We say that no, whether this is subjective or objective, it results into the inner transformation of self, of the knower. Therefore, the term for research is anusandhana and shodha. Research comes into the West from 14th century onwards, and only in 18th century, research implied the investigation of a field of knowledge. Mind you, before 18th century, research was never used in the sense of critical investigation. But in India, you have tarka. Tarka comes from the Vedas. Tarka, vāda, pramāṇa shastra, nyaya, 6th century BC onwards. So, you see, but what is the end of nyaya? Nishreyasa, your inner transformation, because you will become a changed person, because once you realize truth, arrive at truth, there will be an inner transformation for the good of humanity and for your own good also, that is your individual good as well as the good of humanity. So, remember, then there is a linear progressive logic used in Western frameworks. In our tradition, there is cyclical, layered reasoning. You cannot separate Nyaya from Vaisheshik, Nyaya from Mimamsa, and Sankhya from Nyaya and Mimamsa. Look at, these are the multiple aspects of the same, multiple explanations of the same reality which are interconnected. So, it is cyclical because, remember, this is very significant. All the pramāṇa become prameya, that is, the means of logic, means of right knowledge, again become the objects of inquiry. Because when I like pramāṇa, we say that this is direct perception. Now, what is perception? Suppose I ask you, what is perception? Then I am explaining perception. You know, the concept of perception has to be proven again as an object of inquiry. And you have to prove a pratyaksha through anumana, through shabda, through upamana. So again you see this interchangeability of pramāṇa into prameya and prameya into pramāṇa. Again, so this is cyclic reasoning. Then what are the possible, you can say, possible, I would say, defects? Are there any criticisms of our Oriental or Indic research methodology? Yes, there can be certain points that have not been worked on as they should have been. First is, there is a lack of standardized framework. We study all these 6 systems of Indian thought, and if you include Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Shaktism, or even aesthetic Advaita, Shabda Advaita, then all these 10 systems in a disjointed manner, either as a student of philosophy or a student of aesthetics. You don't study them as tools of research. So that is one criticism. There is not even a single book, Shivadi, on Indian research methodology. So you are very, very privileged to have been exposed to a kind of discourse where a preliminary effort has been made to sensitize you to work on this kind of Indic research methodology. Then there is a perceived lack of objectivity from the Western point of view. I mean, these are the points. They would say, why are you emphasizing that these are the Indic methods? You are not objective. So remember, they have camouflaged their subjectivity under a cloak, under a curtain, under an avarana of subjectivity. That is, or you can say otherwise, their subjectivity is camouflaged under a cloak of pseudo-objectivity. That is the better way of putting it. How? A glossary of literary terms, Shivadi by M.H. Abrams. Is it a glossary of literary terms? Is there any Tamil literary term? Is there any literary term from Indic tradition? Sanskrit, Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada? No. Bengali? No literary term? But how can it be? It should have been a glossary of European or Euro-American literary terms. That should have passed the test of critical logic. So, when you have normalized, neutralized, you have created a false universal imaginary, hiding and covering your most aggressive subjectivity and subjectivism. Most aggressive. Are you getting my point, Ansh? That you have concealed your own subjectivity, your own partisanship, your own biases by tempering them with, camouflaging them with a kind of veil of objectivity. India is neither subjective nor objective. India is neither subjective nor. India is. Indian knowledge system believes in the isness. Whatever is. So whatever is reality, we accept that reality, and that reality we will critically examine. Whatever is. So, pratyaksha. Pratyaksha is pratyaksha. If it is to be received or perceived through anumana, even then we have to create a sound logic, a process of logical argumentation. Only then whatever has not been perceived through senses may furnish truth. So look at this objective and subjective. Yes, this is something, this is a charge that can be leveled at the Indic methods of research methodology. Then there is lack of integration with modern research norms. What are the modern research norms? Artificial intelligence. You can counter question me, sir, what is the connect between, now we can produce any kind of research paper using DeepSeek, using Chat GPT. So sir, no inference is my inference, no perception is my perception, no reason is my reason, but still one may produce the semblance of critical reasoning using artificial intelligence. Then again, and all these practices are not rooted in jnana, in knowledge. They will only produce one form of ignorance and take you to another level of ignorance. So you are progressing from one level of ignorance to another level of ignorance, where, as Rajiv Malhotra says, artificial intelligence and the future of power, that we are subjecting ourselves by the mindless application of AI, to the process of continuous modernization and stunting of human reason. But this modernization is hailed as the moment of freedom because it gives us plenty of time to do other things. So your artificial intelligence displaces your buddhi, your mana. your chitta also. And we do forget that artificial intelligence is nothing but an aspect of our own intelligence. Can there be artificial intelligence without human intelligence? Tell me, who creates? And who creates, who thinks when you think? That's a question. In prameya, when Atman has been defined, that Atman is the motor, primary motor, that activates all your senses, that activates your intelligence, that activates your minds. So if that, it doesn't depend on a battery, it doesn't depend on that continuous, you can say, replenishment of that system, whereby the bits of information and data are fed into a system algorithmically in order to create information in the form of knowledge, artificial intelligence. So this is not a fault in our system, because either you accept artificial intelligence or the kind of post-humanist framework where the human is not needed for the production and expansion of knowledge. Now that is not our position, because that is the domain of pseudo knowledge. Anyway, and we have discussed these key philosophical ideas and philosophical diversity which marks the entire spread, the entire span of Indian knowledge systems. And what is the way forward? That if we use all these methods and insights in an interdisciplinary mode, in a hybrid mode, that a student of sociology should be with you, the students of world literature, that a student of science should also attend these lectures of critical reasoning, critical research methodology. And so that is how we can be interdisciplinary as well as a kind of hybrid pedagogy. It will not be the pedagogy of the oppressed, as the famous Brazilian thinker said, that our pedagogies are the pedagogies of the oppressed and for the oppressed. The pedagogy should be pedagogy for freedom, pedagogy of liberation. And then there should be institutional support for all such programs. So full credit to the Dean, Professor Sushant Mishra, and the Vice Chancellor for allowing us to create to design a new course where we can sensitize our young minds to look within and to explore that hitherto unexplored field of research methodology, where Indian systems of knowledge are used as tools of critical reasoning, and then capacity building among researchers as well as teachers. This course or Indian research methodology is impossible without creating a pool of minds where young researchers and young teachers, faculty members, they should all be trained into how rigorous argumentation, how critical inquiry can be conducted using Indian systems of thought, logical inquiries. So Professor V.N. Jha has been doing this for a long time. Shailaja, do you know Professor V.N. Jha? V.N. Jha has been an exemplar. Professor Kapil Kapoor, they have been the exemplars. Rajiv Malhotra, they are the modern exemplars of producing, expanding the Indic systems of thought, and they are the new intellectual Kshatriyas, in order to create a new kind of transformation, a new kind of Swaraj of ideas, a new kind of Swaraj for our young minds, where they can visualize the pursuit of knowledge, which is not tethered to any kind of ideological dogmatism, theological dogmatism, or any other kind of orthodoxy. Thank you very much.